Hello, I'm Jacqueline Schwab, and I'm here under the auspices of the lovely Brewster Ladies Library in my hometown to celebrate music from cultures around the world. This won't be a map of the world, but really more of a personalized journey, starting with my roots in the melting pot of Pittsburgh, and then my life later on in Boston and on Cape Cod. And I'll be featuring music that I know, so it's mainly European, and we'll have some from Africa and South America. So, more to come on this whole program. But I'll start by playing an Irish air, and Irish airs can be played or sung, but they usually have a lot of breath and emotion in them. And this particular one has many titles, and some in Gaelic and some in English. The English title would be For Ireland, I'll Not Say Her Name. And one of the stories that goes along with this song is a young man who's in love, and but he feels he doesn't have enough money to ask his lover to marry him, so he emigrates, possibly to the U.S., earns money, and comes back, at which point he sees that she has married somebody else. But we're going to come across the ocean to America, where Irish music is much beloved. So the Irish came to America, the Scots did, and some Scots came over by way of Ireland, and they were called the Scotch Irish. They settled first on the eastern seaboard in the Appalachians, up in Cape Breton, and then they expanded outward all the way to California, and some stayed in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I grew up. And they weren't welcomed right away, like most ethnicities who moved to the U.S. They, you may have heard of signs in stores saying, "The Irish need not apply." But that attitude changed, and now everybody celebrates St. Patrick's Day. Well, I'm going to celebrate Scottish music, and with that, I always think of a friend on Cape Cod where I live named Stuart, who died some years ago at 85, far too young. He was a Glaswegian, which means he grew up in Glasgow, and he had quite the celebrated career and distinguished naval actions when he was a teenager in World War II on a ship, and then he was an engineer and had a business career teaching people all over the world, teaching poor people all over the world, and budding engineers, I think, and worked for the Ford Foundation in the 60s with his family. One of his children were born then, and he was very proud of and loved his family and proud of his career, but he was especially proud of being Scottish. So after he died, at his memorial service, two of his work colleagues related a story about after he had moved to the U.S. with his wife, who was American. They worked all across the U.S. and they drove, and his colleagues who were not Scottish related that every time the car crossed the state line, Stuart would insist the car stop, and they get out and stand at attention and sing, "I belong to Glasgow." So he was really, really proud of being Scottish. And tonight's concert celebrates people being proud of their roots. And the difficulty, of course, is that we have to let other people be proud of their roots, and that's something we haven't solved in America or in the world yet. But this concert celebrates these different cultures. But I'd like to play a Scottish dance set that wouldn't be normally played on the fiddle. I'll play it as parlor piano. And the first piece is this raspe, which has that Scottish snap to it. And this will be a concert version. You won't be able to dance to it. And then two reels, all from sort of the turn of the 19th century. Thanks for listening. Well, I'm having the joy of performing on my grandmother's piano, built by Steinway in 1917. And my grandmother lived in Pittsburgh, but she was Pennsylvania Deutsch, had grown up in Lancaster, PA, and then somehow her family moved across the state. She was very loving, but highly cultured and very sensitive, and had a poker face. You really couldn't guess what was going on with her. Very reserved. Her home looked Victorian with these stuffed chairs that had these lace antimacassars on them, and she was a wonderful classical pianist, played classical duets with my grandfather, who was an architect and taught at the Carnegie Mellon. It was called Carnegie Tech then. And so my father grew up in this very cultured, reserved household. They weren't Lutheran themselves, but they would have both had a Lutheran background and Germanic. And I didn't really know a lot of what my father was thinking until he was in his 90s, when he would let a little bit more of his emotions come to the surface. So I performed this concert in Lancaster a couple falls ago, and I looked out of an audience of about 100 people, and they all had that poker face that my father had. But by then I knew that there were emotions behind that face, and that I could trust that they were there to listen to some music. And so I felt like I could relax and play. I later played the concert way up north in Minnesota, a lovely town that loves the arts called New York Mills, where my host, who made the initial call to me to come, said half the town is German and half the town is Finnish. And I did ask them at the concert, and raise your hands, and half of them were German and half of them were Finnish, but they all celebrated St. Patrick's Day. But they again had that reserve that I had associated with my father, that might have been individual to his family, but also I think was partly cultural. And that's one model of American immigrants, that they are apparently were met at the boat by somebody from their family or a friend, put onto a train or a stagecoach or whatever method they had to get across the U.S., and then they would just rejoin their village. So that is one model of how our America has come to be, and the music that we still listen to. In honor of the Finns, though, in the audience, I'm going to play, and this came from my host from the New York Mills concert, suggested this. I'm going to play Sibelius's Finlandia hymn, which some of you might know even as a hymn in your own tradition. And I've learned that there are Finns on Cape Cod who came and worked the cranberry bogs. And I'll follow it by a Swedish traditional waltz. So, growing up in Pittsburgh, one of my high school friends was Polish. And her parents, I think, came over perhaps around the time before, during, or after the Second World War. They were Polish Catholic, and very different culture from mine. But I loved going to their house. With her mother would make me Polish food, and I would see these beautiful handicrafts that they had gracing their home. And Joanna's mother and father were both medical doctors, and that's also what Joanna became. And I've lost touch with her, but I'll think of her when playing this next piece, which I learned at folk dances in Boston later on in the 70s or 80s. I'm going to share with you Adas Kujawiak. And I think there's some dancers listening tonight, so you'll probably have danced this. You may have danced this before. It was created by Ada Dzibanaska and set to a very old traditional tune, I think very old. And it's a romantic partner dance. So you and your partner are in this bubble, and the rest of the world is not there in that bubble. It's just the two of you. And excuse me. The first two parts of the dance are hang on. The first two parts, you're just with your partner in this barrel hold. You're quite close, and you're whirling round and round. It's courtly, but also very romantic. And the last part of the piece gets more earthy. You separate away from your partner. You'll hear this in the music. And then in one version that I learned, the men can do these, while the woman's doing other things, the men could do these show-offy, knee-slappy things that you see in various kinds of Eastern European dancing. My version also channels a little bit of a feeling of Chopin's brooding and his pride for Polish music. My mother, I want to tell you a little bit about my mother, who was the child of two Ukrainian Jewish immigrants. They grew up in the same village or town in the Ukraine, but didn't meet each other till they came to America. And my grandfather's mother brought him over to avoid becoming cannon fodder in the Tsar's army at the start of the Russian Revolution and also around World War I. And they came over on a banana boat. My mother was raised by her grandmother, who only spoke Yiddish. And yet my sister and I were not taught Yiddish. That's another model for immigration. So I grew up in a Jewish community, but I felt a little out of place because I wasn't raised as a Jewish person. But my mother had all of that Eastern European strength and passion. She would hug us and she would tell us she loved us, and she would have a huge fury that could just come on just like a storm cloud and was very scary. So apparently I did learn some Yiddish, which comes out when I'm angry. But both of my parents did share a lot of things of love of education and multicultural situations and standing up for the oppressed, etc. But a friend's mother tried to teach me Hebrew. She thought I should learn Hebrew, and she tried very hard and failed. But Esther, she lived across the street from the Tree of Life synagogue, which I passed every day on my way to school, and it's the synagogue that had the horrible shooting in 2018. I'm going to play a piece remembering that her attempt to teach me the alphabet. It is a well-loved Yiddish song, Oifem Pripacek, about a rabbi teaching his students the alphabet. And the words have a lot to do with study, 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 study. And sometimes the studies are laced with tears. Well, I've used up so much time talking, but I do want to tell you one more story, and then we'll see how many pieces we can fit in. This is a story of folk dancing in Pittsburgh, which saved my life as a shy teenager. And there was a great Pittsburgh Folk Festival that in the big civic arena, thousands of people would come. And it was sort of my brigadoon shining moment of my year that I looked forward to. And one of the best moments was getting to dance in the Bulgarian Club on Saturday night after the festival closed down. Normally, we plebeian folk dancers were not invited to the club, but that one night of the year, we were most welcome. And we poured in, this was after midnight, and we folk dancers were dressed in our folk dance duds, peasant blouses and shirts and embroidered vests and the whole thing. And the Balkans, this is tucked in behind the steel mills where many of the Balkan people in Pittsburgh worked. The Balkan people were assimilated in their clothing, and so the men were wearing suits and shine shoes, and the women were wearing mini skirts. This is the 60s, and stockings and high heels, and it was very funny. But for one night, we were all one community, held hands and danced together. And to celebrate that, I'm going to play a Bulgarian dance tune, one of the many Bulgarian tunes. Folk tunes are very strong and not easily heard by Western ears at first. You have to get used to them. But this one is very sweet and comes from choral music, and we used to dance to it. Trugnala Rumjana, a sort of a love song. And then I'm going to follow it up with the Neapolitan Tarantella honoring Gino Ricciati from Pittsburgh, who led the I Campagnoli folk dancers that I so loved. And my salute to Pittsburgh folk dancing. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child honoring the slaves who came to America, immigrated without their permission being asked, and contributed so much to American music. I only have time to sort of do a dash through two more pieces, and so I'd love to share with you my current new love of Brazilian music that I heard many years ago in from a recording from a housemate studying tango, and Brazilian tango, and it will take the rest of my lifetime to really know how to play. I'm going to play Ernesto Nazare's Carioca, honoring the people from Rio. And Nazare, this is turn of the 20th century, I think 1917 or something like that, and he had developed his own style that was picked up by many classical composers, and he's still heard today. And since we're out of time, I think that's all I'll say, except I think I'm going to go straight into the last piece, which is a Chilean piece, and you can email me to find out how I learned of it, because it's a whole story in itself. But the story that the piece tells, it's called El Copihui Rojo. It's the national flower of Chile, and it tells the folkloric story of it's a 1917 piece, also roughly then, and the folkloric story of the Copa tribe and the Wee tribe. This is a sort of Romeo and Juliet, West Side Story kind of story, where there's one person from the Copa tribe and one person from the Wee tribe who fell in love, wanted to get married, and were prevented by their tribes because they were warring tribes, and they murdered the young couple, threw their bodies in the lake, as the story goes. And as the people there were grieving by the side of the lake, a little bit belatedly, finally thinking about what they had done, a magnificent flower arose from the lake. So I feel like that's the way to end a piece, with some hope about the future for multiculturalism in America and around the world. And I'll say some thanks at the end if we have any moments to do so, if we don't get cut off. So first Nazare's Carioca, and then moving over to Chile for El Copihui Rojo. So I've run out of time, but I really do hope you're still there so I can thank you for joining me on this hot summer's evening. And it's really a pleasure to share this music with you. I have been working on I Lift My Lamp as a recording, which I hope will be out next year. We'll have these pieces and some others on it. And on the Sonoluminous label, probably out in the spring. I have some other thanks. I want to thank the Brewster Ladies Library, which is always a pleasure to perform at. This time round, I'm not performing there because of the COVID, but under their auspices and with Nori Morgenstein, who really has helped walk me through the vagaries of trying out this method. I want to really thank my husband, Edmund Robinson, who we had gotten very ambitious, and we had wanted to have a second camera and all those things. So you'll just have to tune in to our next concert when we hope we will have all those things worked out. And I want to thank John Page, who tuned my piano, and even it's fallen out of tune because of air conditioner and the weather. But he's a magnificent tuner, so if you live on the Cape, I really recommend him. And if you'd like to stay in touch, you can like my professional page, Jacqueline Schwab, pianist. Or you can Google my name and find a way to email me and get on my emailing list for news of when my recording comes out. And I think that is it. So thank you all so very much. Be well.